new edition of Inside the Huddle, brought to you by Danley's Garage Builders. My name is Brian Chimino with you once again with Mike Clark of the Sun-Times and Beth Long of Fox Sports and Scout.com. Going to talk about some of the games that took place this past Friday in Week 9. If you want to see a show about the playoff rankings and the seedings and some of the pairings, check the other video out that we recorded this weekend right here on High School Cube News. So, Mike, your number one team at the end of the regular season, Mount Carmel, basically as a result of St. Rita knocking off Loyola in somewhat of an upset, but Mount Carmel, your number one team to end the regular season.
Their only loss was to Loyola in that very strange weekend where they wound up playing over the course of 2 days because of storms. And in the head-to-head between Mount Carmel, Loyola, and St. Rita, you know, Mount Carmel played Loyola pretty tough, and they handled St. Rita pretty easily, I thought. Loyola, on the other hand, did not play very well the other night against St. Rita. You know, whether that's a factor in the playoffs, we don't know. We'll have to find out. But, yeah, at this point, you know, and there's certainly some other teams that have claims as well. Montini's undefeated, Bolingbrook's undefeated, Glenbard North is my number one team in Class 8A right now, so we'll have to see how it all plays out.
So because of the St. Rita win over Loyola on Friday, you got a three-way tie at the top of the Catholic League Blue. Beth, that's no fun.
No surprise. I mean, all three teams have really talented prospects, and I know that even with Matt Domer on the mend for Mount Carmel, there's no lack of Division I kids on those three teams.
And at number two, Glenbard North, like you mentioned, after winning that DuPage Valley pretty single-handedly over Wheaton North.
And that's pretty amazing that they've run the table in that conference, the DuPage Valley, 2 years in a row, because there's some really good teams in that conference, and really good prospects, obviously, too. Justin Jackson, if he's not the player of the year for everybody, I'd be stunned. I mean, he's already got 2,500 yards plus, 33 touchdowns. Last 2 years, he's over 5,100 yards and 68 touchdowns. You know, he's just clearly the best player in the state, and there's nobody really even close, partly because he's also a pretty good defender.
When I think of Justin Jackson, I think of, like, what can he not do? There's not much that he can't do on the field, and I imagine if you wanted to put him at quarterback, he could probably throw a pretty decent spiral, too. He's just that talented all the way across the board.
Up in Lake County last week, we talked about the North Suburban Conference Lake Division Championship. Stevenson knocking off Lake Zurich. Beth Long jinxed the Bears with her MVP segment last week. But pretty uncharacteristically, Lake Zurich 6 turnovers, but give Stevenson credit. They were down 17-0 and came back.
Yeah, I mean, Stevenson has rallied pretty well from that 0-2 hole that they dug themselves into at the beginning of the season. You know, and looking ahead to the playoffs, we were talking about some of the tough early matchups. Mount Carmel, St. Rita is a possibility in Week 2 in 7A. Stevenson could get Glenbard North in the second round in 8A, which is pretty ridiculous because, I mean, you know, you look at the talent on the field for that possible matchup. I mean, you know, that might be a game that you would be at in Week 2, I'm guessing.
Certainly, and that could have also been a game that would have been for the state title if it aligned correctly because those two teams are so talented.
So that's pretty much all the news considering the rankings. You want to see the final top 25 of the regular season, check them out right here on High School Cube News. Sort of a somber story that we wanted to bring up. Former Simeon star Demarius Reed was found dead on the campus of Eastern Michigan last week. Kind of a tough time for the Simeon community.
I actually covered their game this past weekend where they opened up the public league playoffs with a pretty easy win. And, you know, this is a team that's definitely playing with a purpose right now. Not that they weren't before, but the funeral, which we covered on Saturday as well. I mean, you know, anytime something like this happens, it's a tragedy, obviously. But there was a special connection for Demarius Reed with a lot of the current players and coaches, too. And, I mean, it hit them even harder than you might even expect, certainly. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I talked to Dante Culbreth, the Simeon coach, and he actually stayed away from the team for a few days because it hit him so hard, and he told me that he did not want the team to see him in this condition, basically. But, you know, there's certainly a lot of emotion that Simeon is playing with right now, and they will be playing with the rest of the season.
And speaking of the Simeon Wolverines, Beth, the MVP segment this week.
Yes, we're going to be focusing on Darnell Cockerell, kind of the jack of all trades from Simeon, and I'm sure that he'll be able to talk a lot more about exactly, you know, who this team is playing for and why.
Anything going on in the recruiting world right now as well?
Actually, the biggest note is Crete Money, who had an incredible comeback. Speaking of incredible comeback, Saturday against Rich Central to win the Southland Conference, hit star defensive lineman Chris Slayton. He is going to take official visits to Michigan State, Syracuse, and Illinois. He hasn't set any dates yet. And also, speaking of Crete, linebacker Niles Morgan seemed to have a pretty good time about his visit, or on his official visit to Notre Dame, which he took a couple weekends ago. Is it enough to keep him in the Midwest? I'm not certain that it is enough to keep him in the Midwest. I think he's probably still headed south, but he did enjoy himself.
Again, if you want to see a show about the rankings, the pairings, and possible matchups, check out the other special edition of Inside the Huddle right here on High School Cube News. That'll do it for this edition, though, of Inside the Huddle, brought to you by Danley's Garage Builders. My name is Brian Chimino with Mike Clark and Beth Long. We'll see you guys next week.